Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, and we've got a full course of all the different pills tonight. We've got the blue pill, the red pill, the black pill, the clown pill, and then finally we'll finish with the white pill. And I'd like to call that the maple pill, which essentially is just, they say a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. And if you need a little bit of sugar to help these pills go down, well, why not use some maple syrup versus just processed sugar? But anyways, before we even jump into tonight's show, I just want to kind of highlight with you guys or maybe discuss a few things I see making the rounds on social media. So obviously, when I do this show, I've got my own biases, right? I think that most of you that have tuned in to even a single episode probably understand where my biases roughly line up. But understand, I do gather from a whole, range of different sources in regards to the stories I share with you guys. And, recently, the last few days, I've been kind of going down a rabbit hole on Twitter, just looking at people that probably don't run in the same thought circles as me or probably you guys either. It is wild to see people comparing the truckers to ISIS or ISIL, to comparing them to terrorists. And even the comparisons to January 6th, I think, are overdone and overblown. But I can't help but think about, how we ended up getting here. And I think the real reason that we ended up here is just the fact that, in my humble opinion, at least, that politicians, that the mainstream corporate press, legacy media refuses to interact or even consider anyone else's position, right? They're not willing to actually discuss or explore ideas. We've seen this recently with like Joe Rogan and the focus on canceling him rather than just, disproving his point of view. We've even seen it yesterday when I shared that reporter that was questioning the Ukraine-Russia narrative about whether Russia is creating propaganda, and the fact that the reporter simply wouldn't take the American spokesperson word for it that it's happening is another sign of why I think these two sides are in such conflict. Obviously, I'm much more on the freedom-oriented, libertarian, anarchist, whatever sort of label in that regards you want to apply to me, but for those of us that have a memory, we remember being burned in the past by the government, right? Whether we're talking about weapons of mass destruction with the Iraq War, whether we're talking about the fact that even just recently they said in Afghanistan, Kabul wouldn't fall. All these different things it feels very obvious that the government is very comfortable misleading us. Now, again, if I want to steelman argument why they do so, I'm sure they believe it's in our own best interest. However, a lot of us really, truly do believe in individualism, individual sovereignty. And because of that, we actually want to be able to receive all the information possible and make our own decision, what's right for us, what's right for our families. And when I'm looking at, the current COVID narrative across the West, but in particular here in Canada, I can't help but, again, feel like this could have been avoided if there was more transparency, if there was more authenticity, if our politicians and the mainstream media were willing to be more open and honest and just explore these discussions. Right now, there seems to be a fear from politicians in particular and a lot of the mainstream experts that they can never show any weakness. And to show any weakness or any doubt is to somehow, cede ground to the other side. And the other side has been demonized by them or by the mainstream media to such a level that it's almost unthinkable for them. And yet when I'm kind of going through, the facts as I see them, as I kind of remember them over the last couple of years, while politicians and mainstream media constantly shout it's about health, it's about science, it's about safety, when we actually look back, it's hard to not feel like you're being gaslit sometimes. We've talked about in the past about the Wuhan lab leak, right? About how originally that was, you were laughed out of the room if you were to even openly discuss it, or you were going to be canceled on social media if you dared post about it on platforms like YouTube. But then a year or two later, it's almost just accepted. And then we see emails leaking from individuals that are high up in the administration, including Anthony Fauci and the NIH. And it seems like they were very focused on developing one individual narrative. And understand, when you completely dismiss other people that have valid points, it's naturally going to draw people into a conspiracy rabbit hole, right? If I know they're lying to me about this, if I know they've lied to me about this in the past, what else might they be lying about? I think that's why we see so many individuals now that are anti-government mandates, that are anti-politicians, anti-mainstream media's narratives, constantly wanting to jump to other extreme conclusions. But understand that before COVID actually rolled out, lockdowns weren't part of most countries' pandemic response plans, right? And yet now you're just like, completely dismissed if you even question them. However, as we've discussed multiple times, I'm going to bring it up again later in tonight's show, there was recently a Johns Hopkins University metadata analysis, which really calls into question the effectiveness and any value that's actually brought by these lockdowns. And that's before we even start considering the unintended consequences from them. It's also hard to not remember that back in the summer of 2020, and this is before vaccines existed, we actually were somehow freer. But now in 2021 and 2022, we're actually more locked down. It's somehow made out to be a bigger risk, even though Omicron is, by just about everyone's accounts now, less dangerous and less likely to end up killing you than, say, any other variant, particularly if you have been vaccinated. We've also got like many pundits and politicians that are constantly leading us, originally leading us, I should say, to believe that this was a perfect vaccine, when in fact it turned out to be a leaky vaccine. And again, understand that there's a big difference between those two types of vaccines. And there never seems to be a very clear, just like, hey guys, again, if they were to be authentic with us, if they were to be transparent, I think that it would allow a lot more people to give them the benefit of the doubt. Hey, originally we thought this might be a perfect vaccine. Turns out now that we've got more data, it turns out it's a leaky vaccine. So, trying to pursue a completely zero COVID policy is probably just impossible at this stage. And now we're starting to slowly see that leak out, but it's never discussed in an overall general discussion of laying out all the facts and kind of highlighting the major points throughout the history of COVID at this point in time. It's always just kind of snuck in under the rug, or at least that's what it feels like from my perspective. As well, when we're talking specifically about Canada, we've had no investment really into increasing hospital capacities. Look at the ICU, number of ICU beds in just about any province from 2019 to today, and you're going to barely see a blip in most cases. And yet we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on field hospitals that we've never used. Some of them were like single sourced or sole source contracts, which again means they weren't even open to competition. Some of them still haven't been delivered to this day. And yet that just never gets brought up either. We also find that, a lot of healthcare workers that originally were heroes are now fired and demonized if they choose to not get vaccinated. And yet for the last 2 years, it wasn't an issue. And we were able to just, focus on trying to solve the problem at hand rather than focus on specifically designing a certain narrative to drive people to get vaccinated. And again, with a lack of transparency, with the gaslighting that's occurring, I understand why it's so easy to people to jump to conclusions that, politicians or mainstream media must be in big pharma's pocket. Because again, when you look at it, it seems like they're either ignorant or they're up to some sort of shenanigans, in my opinion. We've also got like the flip-flopping on policy throughout, right? Originally masks weren't important, and then masks were important, and then you need to double mask, and now it's only N95 masks matter. And again, it's never really discussed in an open and honest forum where it's really breaking down like, hey, look, if you're symptomatic and you need to go out, you should absolutely be wearing a mask. If you're asymptomatic, the odds of you wearing a mask dramatically decreasing the spread of the virus is pretty low. Now, again, if you know that you're asymptomatic, you, again, shouldn't go out or you should wear a mask. But if you literally don't know you have COVID and you go out there, again, or if you test positive, but you've got no signs, again, you guys go do your own research on all this. But it's this constant evolving narrative that I think is very frustrating for a lot of us. Again, when we don't look back retrospectively and discuss why it's evolving, right? Occasionally, we will hear politicians or mainstream media refer to the science as evolving, but they never dive deep into what exactly they mean by that. And again, there's lots of studies out there. And at this point in time, almost anyone can prove anything with the studies available. But it's very frustrating when we're not constantly being given the original sources and the logical framework used by politicians to make their decisions, or by health experts or people that are, for example, on the science table. We've also got just completely an unwillingness for open discussions, right? And not only just general discussions, but discussions about jurisdictions which have approached COVID in a completely different manner, right? We're going to cover it later today, but Sweden's effectively said COVID's over, right? As far as pandemics go, we're just going to move on. And for more than a year now, Sweden's essentially just decided to mainly act normal, right? And let people make their own risk assessment regarding to their situation. We've got states like Florida, right, that essentially seem to completely disregard all the COVID rules that here in Canada we have, and yet we don't see dramatic increases in their death rates, particularly when you adjust it for different factors, right? But again, I encourage you guys, go down your own rabbit hole and research all this. We've also got just a complete unwillingness, at least up until recently, to even discuss the potential that COVID could be seasonal, similar to what we see with, the flu. There's been no focus really on preventative healthcare measures like, hey, everyone needs to get in shape. Hey, maybe we should open up gyms or somehow subsidize. And I don't want government subsidizing gyms, but at least it would seem more authentic if they were subsidizing gyms rather than simply like making it illegal for gym owners to operate their gyms, right? The idea of allowing people to stay at home and just get Uber Eats nonstop and not allow them to go to the gym is truly counterproductive. When we see things like, get your shot in the United States and get a Krispy Kreme donut, or, get a free shot of alcohol when you get your COVID shot. Again, all these things are literally counterintuitive to what we understand about the virus up until this point in time. And again, I already mentioned the shutting down of just general dialogue, right? And the fact that, I think a lot of people could be swayed if the experts, right, the mainstream experts, were willing to go on Joe Rogan and have long-form discussions. It's this unwillingness, the desire to only talk about talking points and only make sure you hit those talking points and then move on. People want to actually understand these things, right? There's massive implications to every piece of COVID policy that's been implemented in Canada and across the world up until this point in time. And then the mainstream media, originally, media was supposed to be a check and balance against the government, right? But now they're just focused on fear porn, posting death counts. They'd rather focus on just driving clicks rather than actually exploring things. They'd rather make sure that they're on the right side of the government rather than actually asking them tough questions, right? Like the fact that the media still isn't holding the politicians or the health experts to account for the difference between with COVID, like COVID hospitalizations and people that just had COVID and hospitalizations, right? These are big things. And same with when we're talking about death counts, right? We've seen it primarily more in the United States, but again, that's also in part just due to greater transparency behind some of their death reporting. But like people dying in motorcycle accidents that also tested positive for COVID being counted as a COVID death. It's so disingenuous at times, it feels like, at least, when the mainstream media, when politicians, when the health experts won't at least be like, hey, you know what? It seems like a lot of hospitals, a lot of health districts were overreacting to this. And yeah, we're going to go back and adjust the numbers, but it still doesn't mean that it's not a big deal, right? I think that or at least I won't speak for everyone else. I will speak for myself. I just really want more transparency, more honesty and authenticity. I know that that's almost, counterintuitive when we're talking about politics, because politicians simply want to promise you whatever they think will get your vote in order to stay in power or grow their power base. But the last thing that I just want to point out here, and then I promise we'll get into the main show, is just the complete ignoring of unintended consequences. And so, for example, one of the stories we're going to cover later tonight is going to be about the opioid crisis going on in BC and about how they hit a new all-time high for number of deaths. And again, none of these policies exist in a vacuum. And an unwillingness to explore these ideas and have tough conversations and do it in public, right, during the light of day, I think makes it just far too easy for all of us, myself included, to want to jump to conclusions and paint politicians, paint health administrators, paint the mainstream media with a negative light, right, with a negative brush. So anyways, enough of me ranting. Let's jump into tonight's Maple Pill. And if you guys... I'd love to know where you stand on all that. So again, I assume that those that probably watch this have a certain bias, but let me know your general thoughts. If the government was willing to shoot straight with you, be more open and honest, fess up when they made mistakes, would you be willing to give them a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt? Would you be willing to give them a little bit more grace room? Hey, none of us have ever dealt with a pandemic before. We're all trying to figure this out together. It's that idea of being more open and honest that I think would at least allow individuals like myself to give you the benefit of the doubt. Where when you immediately want to demonize us, right? Even just when we see mainstream media headlines and they essentially interchangeably use anti-mandate and anti-vax as the same thing, or anti-COVID vax as the same thing as anti-all vaccinations. And that just feels so disingenuous, particularly when you've got people constantly specifying where they stand on these issues. And then they're just, again, backed into, oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. It's wild to see how quickly we found ourselves here. And understand that as we continue to see a deterioration in the average person's trust in the institutions, there are real consequences to our entire society, our entire economy. I don't think that this trucker protest, even if tomorrow, again, the politicians snapped their fingers and undid everything, there would still be lingering damage, right? There would still be lingering questions there. And again, as they continue to double down on the rhetoric and double down on their specific talking points and narrative, I think it's going to cause the other side, those that are freedom oriented, to want to double down on theirs as well. And I think that's where you start to see people talking about there needs to be trials before this is all over and done with. What I really want to see is investigations and just get as clear of an understanding as possible about how this all came to be. Because certainly I think that where we find ourselves now is completely unacceptable. And while, yeah, I'll leave it there. I won't talk about tearing down the entire system on tonight's show. Let's jump into a couple of quick updates on the trucker protest, and then I'll get into our first blue pill story of the day. So again, links to everything I'm going to discuss in the video description down below. I want this to really just be the jumping off point for you guys in your research or your rabbit hole journey of information. Don't let this show be the end all be all of your education on this stuff. But True North, I believe, has one of the best daily updates on what's going on with the trucker protest. So link in the video description down below. And they've got their recap of day 17 of the protest. Now, one thing I did want to highlight is I've seen a bunch of different narratives and counter narratives about what's going on in Coutts, Alberta, right? We've talked about this multiple times on the show in the past. And recently, Jason Kenney kind of came out and made an announcement that he was going to be, rolling back a lot of the mandates and a lot of the restrictions in Alberta. And he was actually going to be doing it on a relatively quick timeline. Now, I saw a lot of people that disagree with rolling back mandates and things, saying like, well, the truckers aren't even satisfied with this. Well, understand that while it seems like he's making progress or moving in the right direction to where the truckers, and I just think all freedom-oriented individuals in Canada, want to see Alberta end up, along with all the other provinces, it's not as cut and dry as like, oh, they admitted defeat on all the mandates and everything's better now. And so just want to highlight this tweet from Viva Fry. And so within an hour of announcing into Alberta's vaccine pass, Premier Kenney adds, state of emergency will continue. Businesses may continue QR codes. Vax pass to return if more shots needed. He predicts annual COVID shots for the rest of our lives. And that last one's particularly important because, again, is it literally, are we going to have this fight every winter, right? Every fall or every winter, are we going to have to fight for our individual freedoms and autonomy to make our own medical decisions? Because if so, this is really just kicking the can down the road for a couple of months at this point in time. And I understand why the truckers and those that support them want to continue the protest until it's very clear that these things are rolled back and there's no asterisks or if, ands, or maybes attached to the political narrative here. All right. Now, let's move on to our blue pill story, our first one of the day. So it's been interesting to see there's continuing to be more division in the Liberal Party's caucus, as well as just amongst their MPs. So Quebec Liberal MP Rob Allard also breaks ranks. Trudeau's government handling of pandemic sides with Lightbound. So we discussed Lightbound on yesterday's video, so I encourage you guys to jump back and watch that if you missed it. But three-term Quebec Liberal MP Yves Robillard says he wants Chief Government Whip Stephen McKinnon to apologize to him for dropping him from the House National Defense Committee and sending an email to all Liberal MPs about it. And so what's interesting is we heard from Lightbound yesterday that there were actually more MPs that agreed with him, but he was the only one speaking out at this time. So now we're seeing a second MP come out. I can't help but wonder if we're going to continue to see more, or whether this is just, a small fringe minority in the Liberal government that's speaking out. This is a quote from Robillard. So he, Lightbound, said exactly what a lot of us think, said Liberal MP Yves Robillard, Marc Aurel, Fortin, Quebec. In an interview with the Hill Times, I agree with everything that Lightbound said. So again, I encourage you guys to jump into this entire article if you want to get a real nuanced understanding of where these two MPs stand. But after the press conference, Lightbound had a meeting with Chief Government Whip Stephen McKinnon and stepped down as the regional caucus chair for Quebec. But McKinnon and Lightbound said Lightbound would remain a Liberal MP. Robillard said that he had a conversation with Lightbound this morning and expressed his support to him. Going forward, he said they will work on this issue together. So again, I'm very curious to see if others will join these two Liberal MPs and understand that, at least in the past, when someone's really stepped out of line in regards to the Liberal Party, there usually are serious consequences. And again, we see this in other parties as well, but because the Liberal Party's been in a minority government for a while now, I think that they're much more focused on making sure they keep all their MPs in line, where the Conservatives, in my opinion, and I don't think I'm the only person, I think you can see lots of pundits will say this as well, they're a little bit more lax with their MPs. Again, that may simply be because they're not in power, or it may be a different perspective in regards to how Conservatives run their party. Now from Blacklock's reporter again, government went too far, says MP. So Cabinet's vaccination campaign is needlessly divisive and political. The ex-chair of the Quebec Liberal caucus yesterday told reporters, "Where the hell are we heading here in Canada?" said MP Joel Lightbound. "I firmly believe governments would do well not to dismiss these legitimate concerns and not to demonize those who voice them," said Lightbound, a former employment lawyer. "Here we are, more divided than ever," he said. "It's time to stop with division and the distractions." And continuing on, Prime Minister Trudeau, from the outbreak of the pandemic, publicly opposed vaccination mandates as extreme measures that could have real divisive impacts in Canada. "There are a broad range of reasons why someone might not get vaccinated," Trudeau told reporters January 14th, 2021. And so I'm going to bring this up later, but understand that we're literally like less than a year ago, and we've seen a complete about-face from Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party in general in regards to their narrative. And it naturally leads to the question, what's changed? Right? Point to us exactly why this narrative has changed so much. And this is to my greater point to the start of the show that, again, respect us to be intelligent enough to understand the logic, the mental framework that you're using to come to these conclusions. However, Trudeau later suspended federal employees who refused to disclose their vaccination status. Some 1,084 have been suspended to date, and last August 31st depicted unvaccinated Canadians as unfit parents. Sorry, this is covered up here. "They are putting at risk their own kids, and they're putting at risk our kids as well," said Trudeau. "What about my choice to keep my kids safe?" said Trudeau. "What about our choices to make sure we're getting through this pandemic as quickly as we can?" Again, this is where I get really frustrated, because we know at this point in time, and he knew back then as well when he made these statements, that we've got a leaky vaccine. It's not a perfect vaccine. So it's not going to stop transmission. It's not going to stop someone from getting it. It's probably here is my statement, going to reduce the risk to the individual that gets vaccinated. Again, there appears to be at least some consequences or side effects to at least a portion of individuals that get vaccinated. Now, again, maybe they would have had those same experiences if they would have got full-blown COVID. Who knows? Again, I just don't think there's enough data or studies out there for us to really definitively point to a smoking gun on this, but it does feel disingenuous for our prime minister to focus on this rhetoric and the divisive language that is constantly his go-to at this point in time. "I was hopeful, and I still am, that I could push from within to make the government change course," said Lightbound. "I've been doing this since the election, but I've come to a point where I felt I owed it to myself, to my constituents, to voice my positions publicly. I think the division has gotten to a point where it needs to stop." And again, this is definitely a breath of fresh air. My only real complaint is, why didn't more MPs speak out sooner? And I can't help but think that none of them were going to until it became politically expedient, right? Until they saw that there was actually more than a fringe minority that had these views. I honestly don't believe MPs from the Conservatives or the Liberals or any other party other than the PPC would have actually made these statements and actually came out with a hard line against what our Prime Minister has been doing up until this point in time. And next, I just want to highlight this statement from a Conservative MP. So this is Jasraj Singh Halan. Calls out the Trudeau government for playing politics with the pandemic, says those wanting restrictions lifted are not white supremacists, and the real leaders unite rather than divide Canadians. So again, I really do think this is a great
Mr. Speaker, I applaud the member for Louis Hebert's courage, who stood up to this tone-deaf Prime Minister, calling on his government to stop politicizing the pandemic and stop dividing Canadians. Those speaking out against the mandates and the restrictions are not white supremacists or extremists like the Prime Minister tries to label. They are everyday Canadians who just want a clear path forward out of this pandemic so they can get on with their lives. Canadians' lives, businesses, and mental health have all been devastated, and our Conservative team has been asking for this clear path forward for last year. True leadership unites people, no matter their views. But this Prime Minister demonizes anyone who doesn't agree with his ideologies, calling people racist, even though he did blackface and kicked strong ethnic women out of his caucus who stood up against his corruption. It's time for this Prime Minister to stop politicizing the pandemic and start listening to Canadians who have suffered enough. Canadians need hope, they need leadership, and they need action now for a path forward out of the mandates and restrictions. We all owe it to Canadians to keep our land united, strong, and free.
All right, and then moving on, I also wanted to highlight another MP that spoke out against Justin Trudeau. So this is from Mark Straddle. Today, I called on Justin Trudeau to end his divisive and discriminatory vaccine mandates, something a senior Liberal MP now agrees with me on. Every Canadian who wants to be vaccinated should get vaccinated, but it's time to follow the science and end vaccine mandates.
The Prime Minister rejected vaccine mandates, calling them extreme measures that could have real divisive impacts on our community and country. Since then, no one has created more division than the Prime Minister, pitting Canadian against Canadian and using vaccine status as a dangerous political weapon. In the words of a senior Liberal today, now that we have one of the most vaccinated populations in the world, we've never been so divided. When will the Prime Minister stop dividing Canadians and end his punitive vaccine mandates?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et j'apprécie particulièrement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do appreciate these remarks about vaccine status. When I get vaccinated, I do it for myself, but not just for myself.
And so this, like, I'll let him finish here in a second, but this is what really frustrates me about all of this is, again, just like, let's just focus on the talking points. I'm not going to actually address your questions or your concerns. I'm just going to talk about how vaccines are awesome and about how it protects me, it protects my grandma, it protects my kids,
I do it for my parents as well. For example, when I go visit my parents, knowing that I'm vaccinated, I know I'm protecting them. When my son gets vaccinated, I know he's protected and I'm happy about it. And I also know that he's protecting everyone around him. So it's not just a very important personal decision that we take when we have the right vaccine status. It also means we are reaching out to protect those around us.
It's also interesting, that exact language, when we've got the right vaccine status. So again, this feels very focused on talking points here, where if they need to change the definition of what vaccination is, you know, they've left themselves an out or a loophole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is double vaccinated, had his booster, and just contracted COVID-19. So using mandates to discriminate against Canadians based on their vaccine status is absolutely punitive and discriminatory. A senior Liberal called on the Prime Minister to stop dividing Canadians on the issue of vaccine status. When will the Prime Minister start listening to the science, start listening to public health officials, start listening to his own members of Parliament, and end his campaign of discrimination and division against Canadians?
And so I encourage you guys, go watch this entire video, but I'll save you from the condescending response from the health minister, who essentially says, it's of such concern to me that you seem to be anti-vaccine, And no, pointing out the fact that we have a leaky vaccine isn't anti-vaccine to any stretch of the imagination, but it really does call into question all the rules, regulations, mandates, and restrictions that are being used to justify all the government's policies. So switching gears here, different blue pill. Bank of Canada economy needs more capacity investment, not stimulus. So I just found this kind of interesting. So essentially, this is from Reuters. Canada's economy does not need more stimulus, but rather more investment from both government and business to build up supply capacity to meet strong consumer demand, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem said on Wednesday. Macklem, when asked in an audience Q&A session if government should be spending to further stimulate the economy, said Canada is already in the midst of a consumer-led recovery and more capacity investment is needed to sustain that. To sustain a strong consumer-led recovery, you need investment, he said. Whether it's business or government, what we need is more focus on building that supply capacity. Demand is now looking self-sustaining. And I'll leave you guys to try and read between the lines here on this, but this honestly just feels like some circular logic to justify more government spending. And they highlight here in the article that, Trudeau already promised to spend $78 billion in additional new spending over 5 years to foster Canada's economic rebound. So is the Bank of Canada saying that we need to spend even more money, that we need to go into even more debt? And I'm going to cover it later on, I think, in a red pill or black pill story. But honestly, I've had it up to here with people pushing modern monetary theory on us and all that bullshit gibberish. It was bad enough when you're pushing Keynesian economics, in my opinion, let alone this MMT bullshit. And again, a few of you DM me every now and then on it when I post a meme like, taxation's theft. It is. And you're not going to do some mental gymnastics with me on MMT in order to justify how, oh, no. The reason the government has to tax you is to make you a productive citizen. No, go fuck yourself, MMT pushers. Sorry, that stuff makes me hot. This is from The Economist. Why Ukraine's president is talking down the threat from Russia. And so understand, throughout this entire Ukraine versus Russia thing, the Ukrainian president's been like, yo, let's all just slow our roll here. This isn't as big of a deal. Russia's not about to start a hot war and start shooting us. And at the same time, NATO's like, Russia's about to start a war tomorrow. They're doing false flags. They're doing all this stuff. And whenever asked by the press for, proof, and we covered this yesterday, they're like, well, we just told you, so you should just trust us. Kind of like they say we should trust those experts and other people as well, right? So again, I encourage you to go read this entire article, but just want to highlight a couple of points here. So the first two paragraphs, blood may soon be... again, this is kind of intense in my opinion, but blood may soon be spilled in Ukraine, but will it be real or fake? On January 31st, authorities arrested a group they said was planning to stage riots in Ukrainian cities. The plot allegedly involved thousands of paid anti-government protesters, smoke bombs, and liters of fake blood for the cameras, with medics on the scene to stimulate first aid. The goal, explained Ihor Klemenko, Ukraine's police chief, was to shake the country with viral images of unrest and police brutality. Yet 2 days earlier, Ukraine's government dismissed leaks from American intelligence officials that Russia was transporting supplies of blood to its troops at the Ukraine border to treat potential casualties of war. The purpose of such information is to spread panic and fear in our society, wrote the Deputy Defense Minister, Hannah Miller, in a Facebook post. Rhetorical and analytical rift has opened between Ukraine and America. While the Americans warn of an imminent Russian invasion, Vladimir Zelensky, Ukraine's president, thinks the gravest threat may come from within. So Mr. Zelensky regrets the assessment reportedly delivered over the phone by Joe Biden, the American president. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is certain and that Kiev, the capital, could be sacked. America has denied the report. So understand, literally right now, we've got the Ukrainian president saying that the Joe Biden, the U.S. president, told him something, and now the U.S. is denying it. And so what's interesting right now is we've literally got Russia and the Ukraine saying America's saying things, and America's saying no. It's the opposite. So again, I encourage you guys, go read all this if you want to go down a rabbit hole about how it appears that war hawks in America and NATO are just chomping at the bit to get us into another war. This is from the American Mind, the common sense of the Ukraine crisis. So just want to highlight a point here that I think is sadly missed by oftentimes both sides of the aisle when it comes to American politics. Most Americans will take the sensible view, maintained from the American founders to John Quincy Adams, that we are friends of liberty everywhere, but guardians only of our own. However much we may want the people of Ukraine to enjoy freedom, it is not the obligation of the people of the United States to realize that goal for the Ukrainians. That is the principled view of American foreign policy that prevailed for most of our history. And again, it definitely, unfortunately, that hasn't been the prevailing view since my lifetime, but certainly on a long enough time horizon, we look at the first 100 years or first couple 100 years of America, that was much more in alignment with their perspective, and certainly the perspective of most of the founding fathers. Now, moving on, this is another CBC article, truckers misrepresenting employees by joining Ottawa protests, companies say. So what, I'll let you guys go and do your own read through on this, but a couple things I just want to highlight here is, one, this is already a little bit misleading because most of these truckers are actually like independent contractors that own their own trucks. And yes, they'll have like a label or signage on their truck representing the firm that they're primarily contracted with. But even saying that they're misrepresenting employers is a bit of a stretch of the imagination. And a lot of the examples in this article are actually based upon independent contractors that meet the situation I kind of just explained to you. But this one just kind of stood out to me. So another transport truck company manager who spoke to CBC on the condition of anonymity says his family has been threatened by those for and against the protest since photos of his trucks were posted to the Convoy trader site. So that's fascinating to me that he's getting hate from both sides. And it just seems strange to me that, you know, if pro-trucker protest sympathizers saw his truck or his logo at the protest, that they would wish him threats or wish him death threats and stuff like that. I don't know. Just seemed bizarre to me, but again, it's an anonymous source, so really that's kind of where that story ends. Now, I want to hit upon this. This is from Blacklocks, and it's important that we understand what a farce for a long time the Canadian Senate has been. So in Senate rubber stamping. So a group of 13 senators last night vowed it will not rubber stamp any more cabinet bills. Senator Scott Tanis from Alberta, leader of the Canadian Senators group, said he was weary of political horse trading that has seen bills rushed into law without proper scrutiny. The House of Commons drops bills in our lap on the way out the door to go for their break, Tanis told the Senate. It forecloses any potential for us to make amendments or improvements and forces us essentially in a situation where we are going to rubber stamp something. That is the issue. The Senate has not defeated any cabinet bill since 1996, a liability bill for Toronto's Airport Authority. Tanis said scrutiny was now so lax, cabinet expects senators to pass bills as is a gun to your head if you are an individual senator, he said. And then again, this is worth reading the whole article, but some of the bills were politically urgent, frankly, with a less clear rationale for such a swift passage without consideration for our rules. And we passed them all, Senator Tanis last night told the chamber. Senators had been subjected to wheeling and dealing at leaders' meetings with pressure in caucus or groups to stand quietly and not object, he said. I've been here 9 years, and it seems this has happened over and over again, but none more obvious than last December, said Tanis. I would say that is a problem number one. Yes, that does seem like a problem that you guys literally are just expensive figureheads for Canadian taxpayers at this point in time. Then I found this actually really interesting. The fact that the Biden administration, the pro-lockdown kind of circles, if they're losing CNN at this point in time and CNN's experts in regards to lockdowns and mandates, I can't help but think that the end is near for a lot of this stuff, because if CNN's going to start being pro-freedom, I feel like a lot of the mainstream media is going to collapse around that narrative as well. So CNN doctor, the science has changed, so lift COVID restrictions. And this is from Zero Hedge via Summit News. Despite nothing changing at all, CNN's resident doctor, Lena Wen, claimed this week that the science has changed, and so COVID restrictions, including mask mandates, should now be rescinded. Wen failed to cite any studies or data that shows the science has changed. Again, this gets to my original point at the start of this show. This shit pisses me off so much because they don't point to anything substantial. It literally just seems like it's on a whim, or more likely based upon political polls. If I was to be blackpilled on this story, I would say that the Democrats realize that more mandates, more lockdowns, and continuous restrictions are probably a losing platform going into the 2022 midterm elections. And so now they want to start laying the groundwork to give themselves an escape clause. But again, maybe that's just me being a bit too blackpilled. Wen also started to admit some weeks ago that masks don't work in stopping the spread of COVID, stated that the decision to wear masks should shift from a government mandate to an individual choice. She added that kids in school should not be forced to wear masks because it can be harmful and makes it harder for them to learn. Yeah, it's almost like some of us have been saying this for years at this point in time. But it's fun of CNN to finally catch up. So moving on to some red pill stories. Ontario has no plans to end mask mandates, COVID passports for now, health minister said. So Christine Elliott said Ontario won't be following the lead of other provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan, which started lifting vaccine passport rules this week and plan to end masking requirements in the near future. Elliott said Ontario intends to keep these measures for a while longer, though she didn't say exactly when they would lift. Again, this is the most frustrating part of this, is literally just being at the behest of what feels like a tin-bot dictator. It's just like, nah, I don't feel like doing it today. All right, cool. Well, could you give us some real guidelines so we can understand what the thresholds are so that we can maybe get released early on good behavior? No, we're not going to do it for now. This is a direct quote here. We have no plans currently to drop the passport vaccination situation or masking. We believe that masking is going to be important for some time to come. Elliott said at a news conference in Kitchener, Ontario, adding that the province is following advice from Chief Medical Officer and other expert advisors. We always said that we were going to take a very cautious, phased, prudent approach to opening up, and that's the path we're going to follow. Again, like, who decided that being extra safe or extra prudent is more important at this point in time when so many other governments are accepting that this is endemic, the situation now with COVID? Now I want to highlight from the National Post. First reading, everybody except Trudeau is abandoning COVID restrictions. So I understand this is a bit of an opinion piece, but again, it is interesting to see mainstream media now starting to call out Trudeau to at least a small extent. So top story, in just 24 hours, 4 provinces have announced major drawdowns on COVID-19 restrictions. Saskatchewan, we covered that already, but essentially announced that by Valentine's Day, they are ending all proof of vaccination requirements. It's time to heal the divisions over vaccinations in our families, in our communities, and in our province, said Premier Scott Moe in a statement. Quebec is lifting all pandemic restrictions by March 14th. Although they're keeping the vaccine passport, we're all fed up, Premier Francois Legault said on Tuesday. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced an imminent lifting of damaging restrictions, such as the province's vaccine passport, as soon as the rate of severe COVID-19 patients has curbed enough to allow hospitals to return to normal. Again, we've covered this in previous stories, but at least here in Ontario, and I suspect the same is true in Alberta, you can go back and see the number of ICU beds and the occupancy rate in 2019 or 2017, and it really doesn't look a hell of a lot different than 2020, 2021, or now even in 2022. And PEI announced a timeline to end all mask and vaccine mandates by April 7th. And like PEI, like, it's going to take months for you to roll this back is just ridiculous in my opinion, but we'll keep rolling here. Another one from the National Post, the dominoes begin to fall. Most Canadian pandemic strictures should be gone by spring. So again, it's just interesting to see how the headlines are now being rolled out to the mainstream media, in my opinion. So now this story from the Hill Times. Fed cited caretaker convention to justify delays even after it wasn't in strict application. And so if you guys want to get a better understanding about how Justin Trudeau isn't just a coward today, but his government was kind of a coward right after the election as well, just avoiding tough questions and trying to postpone any bad press. Essentially, under this article does a good job of explaining the caretaker convention. So in the weeks following the September 20th election, the Liberal government cited the caretaker convention as a reason to delay releasing new policies or information. But as the Prime Minister confirmed in information tabled in the House, the convention was not in strict application after election night due to results showing a Liberal re-election and opposition party leaders conceding. So I'll save you guys all the technicalities, but if you want to understand them, really encourage you to go read the entire article. But a convenient excuse or prudent restraint. University of Waterloo political science professor Emmett McFarlane, an expert on institutions of government, said when an outcome of an election results in a continuation of the incumbent ministry, when the convention no longer holds, then the convention no longer holds. I think basically it would be correct to say that the caretaker convention or caretaker government in place during the 2021 election ceased the day after the election day, he said. McFarlane said the cabinet minister, citing the convention weeks after the end of the election, it sounds like an excuse. Yeah, that's probably because it was an excuse. Now, this is from Fee Stories. This is a story we've already covered multiple times, but I'm going to keep bringing it up every single day until I start seeing it discussed at length in the mainstream media and until it just seems like it's common knowledge, because this John Hopkins study continues to get very little respect. And again, understand we covered this in a previous episode last week, but John Hopkins literally didn't even do a press release around this. So lockdown had little to no effect on COVID mortality, new Johns Hopkins study breaks down. So we're into year 3 of the COVID-19 pandemic. From mask mandates to vaccine passports, government restrictions on our liberties remain in place. But thankfully, at least in the U.S., the era of lockdown orders confining Americans to their homes to slow the spread is over. Unfortunately, a new meta-analysis of studies shows that all the pain and sacrifices we endured from those orders achieved little despite their tremendous cost. The new research review was led by economist Steve Hanke and published by Johns Hopkins University. It evaluated 24 relevant studies examining lockdowns and stringency, the impacts of stay-at-home orders, and the effectiveness of specific restrictions. The meta-analysis concluded that lockdowns have had little to no effect on COVID-19 mortality. And as I mentioned originally, pre-pandemic, pre the COVID-19 pandemic, lockdowns weren't even part of our playbook. So again, there should be such a ridiculous burden of proof on governments to justify their mandates and their restrictions right now. And yet it seems like somehow, probably because the mainstream media propaganda wing has just brainwashed the average person into thinking it's the exact opposite, that the extreme burden of proof has to be on opening up rather than on restricting and locking down. Now, wanted to highlight this as well. This is from the Toronto Star. Feds declined offer from Privacy Commissioner for advice on collection of phone data. So remember how the government just took all your phone data and they were like, don't worry about it. It's anonymous. Well, literally the Privacy Commissioner was like, hey, do you want my opinion on this? And they're like, no, we're good. So again, link in the video description down below. I know I'm already going long, so I'm going to keep rolling here. So this next story from the Toronto Sun. So Kinsale, Ottawa freedom fighters think they know more than experts. And one of the reasons I wanted to start off tonight's show with that kind of lengthy monologue was to address what's laid out here in Kinsale's opinion piece. But what I just want to highlight is right here at the very end, because this to me just shows the hubris and the divisiveness and the frustration, it seems like, that these experts have in regards to the average person's desires for personal freedoms and liberties. So you've won. Get rid of masks. Get rid of vaccines. Get rid of the things we know help to protect us and those we love. Get rid of all of that. And when you are in an intensive care unit in a hospital somewhere, drowning in your own bodily fluids, gasping your final breath, someone like Sandra Pierce will be looking down on you and she will be crying. But me, I won't be. Warren Kinsale was chief of staff to a federal minister of health. Yeah. With friends like that, do we need enemies, I guess, would be my biggest question. If he was a chief of staff to a federal minister of health. Because again, this feels like fear-mongering, right? What's the actual death rate, right? What are the odds that you're going to end up drowning in your own bodily fluids, gasping your final breath? It's actually pretty low, particularly if you're not in one of the at-risk categories, right? If it turns out you're underage like 65 and you're not morbidly obese, if you don't have pre-existing health conditions, the probability is pretty freaking low there. But hey, don't let that stop the news media from a good fear porn opportunity. This is from canoe.com. 2021 was BC's deadliest year in opiate overdose crisis. The BC Coroner Service said 2,224 people died from suspected illicit drug overdose deaths in 2021, a 26% spike from 2020. Now, that sounds pretty bad, but you may be thinking, hey, maybe 2020 was a particularly low year or something like that. No, actually, 2020 was an all-time high until this all-time high. And in 2019, right before lockdowns, it was actually dramatically decreasing. Unintended consequences from government policy needs to start being talked about more openly and more honestly. Again, links to the study and the discussion in the video description down below. Just want to highlight this from Holly Doan from Blacklock's reporter. Vaccine mandates are extreme measures that could have real divisive impacts in Canada. There are a broad range of reasons why someone might not get vaccinated, said Justin Trudeau, January 14th, 2021. Funny how things change so fast. And yet, what signs changed, Mr. Prime Minister, in regards to that? Now, Blacklock's, actually, I guess we're getting into black pills now, so I'm going to switch gears here. But admit censorship unpopular. So Cabinet yesterday acknowledged widespread opposition to its proposal to censor legal but hurtful internet content. This is a very important and complex issue, Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez said in a statement. Cabinet last June 23rd introduced Bill C-36, an act to amend the criminal code that proposed $70,000 fines on internet users who write words likely to foment detestation or vilification of an individual or group. The bill lapsed in the last parliament. So while, part of me wants to be like, well, could our prime minister be charged under this? That would be kind of fun. No, it would be a net negative for everyone to see Bill C-36 actually see the light of day. And again, I really encourage you guys, go read this entire article from Blacklocks. And if you're not a paid supporter of them, I encourage you to do it. I think they're doing some of the best reporting in Canada. Free speech advocates, academics, and human rights groups had called the proposal aggressive, punitive, and disturbing. The University of Toronto Citizen Lab said federal regulation was so sweeping it would quash political dissent. Imagine if they had that today, right? How many people do you think would be getting charged or fined right now under Bill C-36? The proposals fail to account for importance of protecting the kinds of expression that are most central to a free and democratic society, including journalism, academic scholarship, and public interest research, debate, artistic creation, criticism, and political dissent, Citizen Lab wrote in its submission to the Heritage Department. And now understand that this actually works on both sides of the equation, right? Or both sides of the aisle. This isn't just, right-leaning individuals are scared or concerned that they're going to be punished. Like, understand that people are like, punch a Nazi and stuff like that. That would fall under this as well. And again, I don't think that we want to actually silence that sort of free speech. In fact, I don't think we should ever silence free speech short of, stopping people from yelling fire in a crowded room. Now, this is from Zero Hedge, and this is via hotair.com. Debate over MMT takes a dumb but not surprising turn. I encourage you guys to go read the entire piece here, but I just want to highlight a couple parts of it. So, in the MMT view of the world, how will you pay for it is a vapid policy question. Real-world resources and political priorities determine how much lawmakers can and should spend. And, this really shouldn't surprise us Canadians. And again, there's a great Twitter thread here. I encourage you guys to go read. But it's literally the logic that our prime minister used when he said, budgets balance themselves. I don't think about budgets or monetary policy. He literally said that. So from the article, additional criticism came in the form of the Substack piece by economist Noah Smith. It was titled, "The New York Times article on MMT is really bad." He points out that the article contains one substantial criticism of MMT from Jason Furman, but says there's no follow-up to the points raised. Even though Furman notes that Kelton did a bad job of characterizing the difference between MMT and Keynesian thinking, the New York Times writer doesn't follow up on this at all. She makes no effort to clarify where MMT actually does differ from other forms of economic thought, nor does she quote any other macroeconomists. This is important because any attempt to engage with the actual substance of MMT quickly finds that such substance is curiously lacking. MMT proponents almost always refuse to specify exactly how they think the economy works. They offer a package of policy prescriptions, but these prescriptions can only be learned by consulting the MMT proponents themselves. There is no model here. No set of equations or definitive formal statements that a layperson could use to generate their own MMT policy prescriptions without appealing directly to the gurus. Again, those experts. Maybe MMT people don't write down models on the economy because they can't. Because as Francois Christian, Rondina Pally, and others have concluded, MMT is not a theory of how the economy works, but rather a set of political memes to push for more deficit spending. Had Smalek looked more deeply into MMT instead of taking her info on it directly from its leading proponent, she would probably have discovered this. So again, I really encourage you guys, go jump through this entire article if you want to understand some more of the criticisms behind MMT. Or, you could literally just go read the Wikipedia definition of MMT and then just apply some basic logic. And I think you're going to really have some questions as well. This is from the Daily Caller. DHS warns Americans that dropping COVID restrictions might lead to acts of violence by extremists. So now you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Just about anything and everything will lead to domestic terrorism, according to the Department of Homeland Security. But that also sounds like pretty much they could have ripped a page from Justin Trudeau as well. It's fascinating to see the narratives as they unravel and get rolled out to the mainstream public. Next one here, this is from the Mises Institute. So elections now decide who can operate your car. And the reason I want to highlight this isn't necessarily a brand new topic, the idea of a kill switch in vehicles and the fact it was passed in the recent infrastructure bill in the United States. But I still find a lot of people aren't actually aware of this. So with the approval of Biden's infrastructure bill, it now turns out the U.S. government is even in control of a kill switch that could disable your car if you are deemed impaired. Likely few voters realized the 2020 election was essentially a referendum on whether or not the feds allow you to drive your car. And I mean, think about slippery slope arguments, right? Like when you give the government a new toy, a new draconian measure that they can enact, they absolutely are going to use it. This is from musclecarandtrucks.com. Biden approved infrastructure bill mandated kill switches coming to cars by 2026. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to start to have a high preference to older vehicles and classic cars very soon. Not just because of EMP considerations, but kill switch considerations now as well. This is from Timcast, but we discussed this a little bit yesterday as well. Ottawa police say they have enlisted help of child services, have not ruled out taking truckers' children. And there's a really impassionate discussion between a CBC reporter and a trucker, and this is a shot from it. I encourage you guys to go watch all of it. And again, I don't think that they're actually concerned about the children's safety here. Now, again, if children are truly at risk, if they're truly in danger, absolutely. But I think areas we could probably focus our energies on, right? Maybe we could really start looking into the impacts that forced masks on school-age children for 8 hours a day has on their development. Or maybe we could just focus on getting, clean drinking water to all the First Nation reserves. I feel like that probably has just as big of an impact on children as focusing on a couple hundred truckers at most that have their children with them at the protest. But again, I'm definitely biased on this. So you guys let me know if you think that that's a misstatement. Now let's move on to a clown pill story here. And while it's never nice to laugh at someone when they get physically injured, just the irony of all this, I couldn't help but want to share with you guys. So this is a comedian doing her stand-up bit essentially about how she's vaccinated and she hasn't died yet. And I'll explain everything else afterwards.
I don't mean to brag. I don't care, but I want you to know, double vaxxed, booster, flu shot, and I'm going to be honest, I have the shingle shot too. And I still get my period. What? Yes! Traveled, went to Mexico twice, did shows, meet and greets, never got COVID. Clearly, Jesus loves me the most. Seriously. So nice. So nice.
So the crowd's laughing there because they thought that was actually part of her bit, but she actually fainted there. So she had a cracked skull. Otherwise, she's okay now. There was even a TMZ article on this, but can't help but feel like that's a little ironic. I'll just leave that at that, though. Continuing on down the clown pill, this is from CTV News. Disgusting and despicable. Alberta NDP calls for apology after Premier Kenney compares unvaccinated to AIDS patients. Now, this to me honestly feels like political grandstanding and just trying to score points and get certain headlines, because when I actually read it, while again, I'm not going to say it's a perfect comparison, I don't think it's that far of a stretch, and I'll explain my thoughts after reading the quote. To stigmatize people in that way, it kind of reminds me of the attributes that circulated in North America in the mid-1980s about people with HIV and AIDS. This notion that they had to be kind of distanced for health reasons. This is a terrible, divisive attitude. So again, understand that this isn't like the hard point that I think the NDP and a lot of the mainstream media is making out to be. He literally says, it kind of reminds me, right? And now understand that we literally did have our prime minister say that he didn't want unvaccinated people sitting beside his children on trains, right, or public transportation. Now, again, this actually isn't that dissimilar to some of the narratives you would have heard in the 1980s about people with HIV or AIDS, right? I'd get banned off of YouTube if I even read this quote, but go look at the quote that Neil Young, that paragon of morality, one of his quotes about gay people handling his potatoes in the supermarket. Because that's a perfect example of how people were thinking about it. And certainly, maybe it's not as widespread in Canada right now with COVID-19 and the unvaccinated. But certainly, if we continue down this trajectory, I can't help but think that, yeah, we'll probably find ourselves in a similar position. And I don't think that Jason Kenney's statement of it kind of reminds me is that bombastic, right? I don't think that an apology is necessary, although I've got no doubt because of cancel culture, he probably will come out and apologize, and that will probably only light a further fire under everyone. Now we've got a lot of clown pills today. I don't know, maybe I was just feeling funny, or maybe I was just trying to force some black pills into being clown pills instead. But CBC reporter live tweets Rebel reporter on Fox News, "Are tax dollars hard at work?" And this was just hilarious in my opinion. A CBC reporter paid an enormous sum of money, was sitting watching Fox News and rage tweeting about it, including Rebel News being on Fox News. So Fox News talking to Rebel News and tweeting about it. I didn't know that's why we're paying $1.5 billion a year to the CBC. Yep. All right. And then this next one here, again, another clown pill for you guys.
Honorable member for Foothills.
Canadians, including a senior member of the Liberal caucus,
are speaking loud and
So, in into this, or maybe you can't read the subtitle here. So Trudeau walked out of question period during my question today. Canadians are standing up right now, grabbing this moment in our history because they know there is something fundamentally wrong when the Prime Minister refuses to listen. This is from John Barlow. And you can literally hear the MPs from the Conservatives complaining and booing.
I'm going to have to ask the honourable member for Foothills to stop while his members on his side are heckling him.
Because Justin Trudeau just literally, why should he have to answer your questions, or why should he have to answer questions from fellow members of Parliament? That feels so below him, right? He was born for this. He essentially should just be crowned our God King. This is our last clown pill for the day. And this is courtesy of Snopes, and this is 100% legitimately true. None of this is even photoshopped or anything. So in early 2022, the Biden administration endeavored to advance racial equity by distributing crack pipes to drug users. And you guys can go look at this. This is factually true, but they rated it mostly false. And so what's true? In 2022, a U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Substance Abuse Harm Reduction grant did require recipients to provide safer smoking kits to existing drug users. In distributing grants, priority would be given to applicants serving historically underserved communities. Okay, that sounds like that's pretty much what the headline read. What's false? This was just one of around 20 components of the grant program, and far from its most prominent or important one, despite being the primary focus of outraged news reports. The purpose of the program was to reduce harm and the risk of infection among drug users, not to advance racial equity, although that was a secondary consideration. This is where we are as a society. It's just wild, guys. But let's move on to some white pills here. So a white pill moment. Sweden declares the pandemic to be over. So as we know this pandemic, I would say it's over. Minister of Health, Lena Hallengren, told Dagens Nyheter, it's not over, but as we know it in terms of quick changes and restrictions, it is. Sweden, being the first country to declare the pandemic a done deal, will be sure to infuriate lockdown fanatics and mask zealots. Despite being on the receiving end of an intense backlash, the country's approach of refusing to impose harsh lockdown restrictions has been completely vindicated. Unlike other European countries such as France and Spain, which imposed draconian lockdown rules, Sweden's COVID-19 death rate is comparatively better, and the country is exiting the pandemic while other nations are refusing to lift restrictions for at least months more. And this is where when Justin Trudeau says, because of lockdowns, because of our vaccine mandates, Canada's doing better than other countries, it's like, compared to who, right? And again, at this point in time, there's enough data out there that we can almost all cherry pick our points. But I think Sweden isn't a completely unreasonable comparison for Canada. And I think a blend of Sweden and Florida actually makes for a very reasonable comparison between the two. As we highlighted in October 2020, Sweden again refused to follow other European countries by reimposing lockdown rules, arguing that those beset by loneliness and misery of being isolated had suffered enough. Again, it is nice to see a country thinking about the unintended consequences of its policy decisions rather than simply, playing to the polls. This is from the Ron Paul Institute. Now, arguably, this isn't really a white pill, but I wanted to bring it up, and it felt most appropriate to bring it up here. So 7 urgent lessons of lockdowns. Lesson 1, free nations should never take their cues from tyrant regimes. So yeah, maybe we shouldn't just blindly follow what China does. Lesson 2, free societies depend on citizens and leaders who think critically and have a sense of history. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't just have politicians that only follow public opinion polls, right? Or only public opinion polls that are essentially massaged based upon how the questions are asked by the mainstream media. Lesson 3, the flexibility of federalism is superior to the conformity demanded by centralism. Absolutely. Because again, if the United States wasn't a little bit more federal oriented, if it was completely centralized, you would literally see that states like Florida and Texas and other states that have been rolling back mandates or just refusing to implement them, we wouldn't even have them as examples to compare our notes against. Lesson 4, under our system, the legislature, the primary branch of government, under our system, the legislature is the primary branch of government. Lesson 5, every policy must be weighed against unintended consequences. Yes. Lesson 6, without scientific consensus, it's impossible to follow the science. It's a hell of a point. And lesson number 7, America is not supposed to run by esoteric experts. Agree. Especially when it's just this nebulous experts, right? That's what really drives me insane. Like, we're listening to the experts. Name them, right? List and name them. And let's then get them into an open discussion with other experts that disagree with them. Oh, no, they only want to focus on their talking points? Well, maybe they're not as great at experts as you made them out to be then. Another white pill from Louder with Crowder. So Ron DeSantis goes nuclear on corporate media's COVID gaslighting. Dems followed politics, not science. Yeah, and maybe, maybe we just weren't catching on. Maybe what, the mainstream media was talking about was follow the political science rather than follow the science. So Democrats must have gotten horrible polling back. Polls that show Americans view Democrats somewhere between Vladimir Putin and Jackson Mahomes. That's the only reason 5 Democratic states and this idiot from CNN all said mask mandates, smash mandates on the same day. All claim they are following the science while not specifying they are following the political science. Begun the gaslighting has get that out of the way. DeSantis has been following data and science the entire time. Science is opposed to the science as defined by the unelected government health bureaucracy. These same Democrats and most of the media accused DeSantis of killing people, ignored the data that proved him right, then accused him of killing people again. Now that the left's preparing to be slaughtered in the midterms, they all sound like DeSantis, knowing that when the left lies, the media swears it is, or swears by it. America's governor has advice to share. Don't let them get away with it. Yeah, and I understand wanting to take that hard line because I think that we're going to see a lot of gaslighting if we start to see the trajectory change, and it certainly feels like the trajectory is changing at this point in time. And then last, this is the final white pill of the day, and then we'll get into 2 memes. This is from David Anber, who's a criminal lawyer. I really encourage you guys to follow him on Twitter if you're not. So I'm sure a lot of us saw this clip that I find personally distasteful of police arresting, I forget whether he was 78 or 80-year-old man.
Stop harassing old men. You don't have to show them anything. It's against the law. You just for what? Hey, what are you doing? Hey! You're ended.
So literally, again, there's other clips where you can see the old man falling down and then being put against the van. And so what David says here, I can advise with consent that I now represent the elderly man you've seen in videos like the one below. In respect of the provincial offense notice he received, my office will be vigorously fighting the charge, starting with what appears to be an unlawful arrest. Based on info I have, it seems clear that the officer either had the man's name or chose not to ask the man's name prior to arresting him. Failing to provide a driver's license is not an arrestable offense if the person provides their verbal identification. And then essentially he just highlights the exact rules and regulations. Again, link in the video description down below if you guys want to understand more about that. But let's jump into 2 memes, or at least 2 kind of like cartoons for the day. So where's Trudeau? And I shared one of these yesterday, but this one's a custom one. I really enjoyed watching it. And honestly, it is really hard to find our prime minister here, but he is a master at hide and seek. And once I started thinking a little bit more critically about how to find him, I was like, you know what? I bet he's wearing blackface. And then it immediately became obvious where he was, down in the left-hand corner here. And then wanted to also share this meme from Paul Joseph Watson. Am I out of touch? No, it's the truckers who are racist, says Prime Minister Blackface. So that's it for today's Maple Pill. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Smash the like button if you get value out of this. Please consider sharing it on social media if you do get value out of it, because I think we both know that the social technocrats, they're not going to do us any favors in regards to the YouTube or any other social media algorithms. But again, really appreciate those of you that are doing your own research, trying to come to your own conclusions based upon becoming informed about what's going on, rather than simply just listening to a couple of headlines from the mainstream corporate press, legacy media. But as always, I want to jump quickly into some of your guys' comments, because I do appreciate the fact that you all engage and interact with me here. So we've got the Hungarian experiment. We need a special on what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. Yeah, it's wild. Also, a WEF special. I know my list is getting long. And I also got a special I want to do on the Canadian healthcare system and how little it's changed over the last couple of years, and about how, compared to Mexico, we actually have a lower here in Ontario, at least, a lower number of ICU beds per capita. But we'll have to save that for another day. Bang says, I agree with Peter, especially on the Ukraine topic, would be interesting. Rise Above says, take the Matt pill. Appreciate it. Abdul saying, agreed, need that special episode for Ukraine, Russia. I'm sure there's lots more people don't know about the situation. Absolutely. Matatat, 2020, over 1,900 overdose deaths in BC. 2021, over 2,200 overdose deaths in BC. Yeah, again, it's been dramatically. I'm not sure about your. Yeah, that's how it played out. And again, in 2019, we actually saw a dramatic decrease where I think it was around like 1,600. COVID deaths are under 3,000 over 2 years. Oh, that's interesting. Is that from BC specifically? Because that would definitely be worth looking into. I should have done a deeper dive there. Craig Campbell, more like anti-gene therapy. Okay, this comment might get me canceled. Again, for Douse time, it's not a vaccine. It went through the proper test. People referring it to the vaccine, the more we refer to it as such, the more deception. Appreciate you sharing your perspective on it, Craig, and I don't think I'll get deleted for that comment, hopefully. Exactly what's changed? Yeah, I think that's what a lot of us are asking these days. Aislinn says, if the government was as transparent as I would like them to be, then the certainty would conclude that 90% of the government should be abolished. Yeah, I think at least a good 90% could be gotten rid of. Y'all better hit that like button. Well said, Aislinn, says Abdul. Legault just removed the rules, and it's like job done. We must be super happy with the crumbs. It is very frustrating, Jean-Francois. And definitely, I think that we need to continuously hold politicians and the administration to account for what's been going on. And again, just because they loosened some rules or restrictions doesn't mean that they've abolished all of them. And most of these politicians seem to be leaving a very large kind of, exit stage left option for themselves if something changes, right? But again, I think that the burden of proof at this point in time should be extreme in regards to justifying what's going on versus the opposite. Hungarian Experiment says, it's honestly so weird to see all the other members of parliament sitting there with masks on. Yeah. So weird. It's a cult. Yep. Aislinn says, how did we normalize the phrase double vaxxed with a booster? Shouldn't it be vaxxed with 2 boosters? The aliens watching Earth are probably laughing their asses off at how crazy we are. Jean-Francois says, Scritch Rumble, Hirschman has been an embalmer for over 20 years. In 2021, he started noticing very odd blood clots that he had never seen before. In January 2022, 65% of his cases exhibited these clots. That's interesting. I haven't gone down that rabbit hole. Farzana, RE Taxes, have you read The Federal Mafia? I haven't. I'll add that to my list of books to check out, though. We got Bid Hunter saying, I hope I can travel by airlines, even though I am not vaccinated as an anti-vaxxer. Yeah, I definitely look forward to free mobility, as we should have always been allowed to do. And again, despite how often we maybe focus on red pills and black pills on this show, I do have hope. And again, a lot of it's due to the fact that the average Canadians are standing up and speaking out. And I constantly see it in mainstream media to this day, and Twitter comments, people trying to gaslight and still saying this is a fringe minority or they're paid provocateurs from Russia. The disingenuousness of that stuff, right? Again, you should need real proof. The same way that when the U.S. is telling us about false flag operations that Russia's doing, we should ask for proof before we go to war with Russia. It doesn't seem that far-fetched to ask for that stuff, right? Again, we can even look back to like World War I and some of the propaganda that the British and Americans used to justify getting involved in the war, right? The German atrocities. And again, I'm talking specifically about World War I here, and when you specifically look at some of the claims, they weren't necessarily as the claims are a lot more bombastic than the reality of the situation that occurred. And as is the case in a lot of wars, both sides are often guilty of poor decisions and atrocities. All right. Well, there's way more comments that I'm going to be able to fully get to in tonight's show, but I really appreciate all you guys that are sharing your perspectives. Again, smash the like button, hit subscribe, share on social media, all that good stuff. Really appreciate, though, just my fellow Canadians, the truckers out there, everyone that's speaking out, that's focus on trying to find truth, that's demanding transparency and authenticity from their leaders, from the administration, from the mainstream corporate press, legacy media. I know that's a mouthful, but I think I really want to use the full frame there, because to just call them the mainstream media at times at least feels like it's a disservice to everything, because I don't know, other than for the fact of this show, that's really the only reason I turn to them a lot of the time, because I understand the fact that they're often stretching and very malleable in their presentation of facts. But anyways, enough of me rambling on. We've already gone long tonight. I'll see you guys tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, if you guys hate watching this on Facebook or YouTube, reminder, I am uploading the replays to Rumble and BitChute. And if I ever disappear off of Facebook or YouTube, you guys know where to find me, Rumble and BitChute, the Maple Pill. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.